Welcome to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. In today's episode, we're actually going to be tackling one of the recipes for my 2015 book, Deceptive Desserts. So this is actually a recipe called Peppermint Bark Bonsai, and it is a candy cane tree covered in chocolate. I came up with this recipe really quickly for the book, and it's cute, but I think I could do it so much better now. And I've also never filmed a tutorial on how to make one. So that is what we're tackling today. With that said, let's begin. All right, so let me give you a couple little tips here on how I'm working with this candy cane. The first is you should probably always wear gloves when you're handling food. I haven't always, but I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's a really good idea to do that. The second is you're going to want to protect your fingertips because these candy canes are very hot. And I found that doubling up these gloves with some dishwashing gloves really did the trick in allowing me to manipulate the candy without singeing my fingers. I actually ended up spending quite a bit of time experimenting, trying to find just the right temperature and duration to bake these at. And it seemed to be that about 265 degrees in a toaster oven for roughly 2.5 minutes kind of got them to the point that I could start bending them. And from there, if I needed them to be just a little bit softer, I'd pop them in for another 30 seconds, see where they were, and I would just go from there. The way that I'm building the base of this tree is I'm going to braid the tops of 3 of these candy canes together and create a tripod with their legs. And I'm going to let these set up, and then from there, I'm just going to continue layering. And this is just a really great jumping off point to start building a shape that's going to project off of this platter. Another great tip I can share is instead of holding this thing all the way until it cools down, you can just take a wooden skewer and prop it up and hold that in place so you can work on other parts of your tree. I wanted my tree to have a bit of a fairy tale-ish kind of look. And so what I'm doing to achieve that is I'm taking the roots and I'm kind of twisting them into little snake-like shapes, and hopefully it will lend itself to that feel. Something that I think is really important to keep in mind if you do decide to tackle this is your weight distribution. With a natural tree, obviously, they have a root system that's going into the ground, which is giving it a lot of support. And you're not going to have that benefit here. So you're going to want to make sure that you have plenty of candy canes covering a surface area below, and that anywhere that you're going to be building up weight on top, there is a counterbalance also happening on the ground. Another thing I found was that the taller the tree was getting, the more creative I had to get with the skewers to support everything so I could just keep working. Let me give you maybe the most important tip of this entire episode, and that is which candy canes to buy. So I picked up all of the different kinds of brands and I experimented by heating them up. All of the other ones seem to have kind of like maybe just like a coating of that candy cane pattern. And so when you heat them up, they just sort of break and crack apart. Well, the Spangler brand is the only one that seems like it's a true candy cane all the way through. So when you heat it up, you can twist it and manipulate it, and it maintains that candy cane pattern. So it is perfect for this. To add some security, what I was doing here was I was basically creating initial passes of candy cane, and then once I had actually managed to get something to stick really far out and hold, Then I started heating up candy canes and just redoubling over those areas to make sure that they had a decent amount of strength. Let me share a really great tip that I learned the hard way, and that is you want to create your branches off world and away from the structure because obviously you're pulling and tugging at these pieces of candy cane. That tension on this is very likely to snap something. Once it's coated in chocolate, it'll be a lot more sturdy, but at this point, it's very delicate. So once your branches are done and you're happy with them, I took a heat gun on the lowest setting and then just whichever was like the connecting tip of the branch, I gently heated it, let it get nice and glossy and gooey, but not singed or burned or anything. And then I just affixed it wherever I wanted it and held it in place until it's set. Something that I think is really fun about this part of the project is you have so much flexibility as far as where these branches end up. Trees, honestly, so long as you're tapering the ends of your branches and it's continually just getting skinnier and skinnier, there is no right or wrong thing to do, and it will look like an organic tree just so long as you don't do anything that's too consistent and you keep scattering your pattern. Something really important to keep in mind here is that this stuff is very delicate and you are going to break something that you like. So you're kind of building a game of Jenga here that you don't want to lose. And I knew at any point here I could lose the whole thing. And so if you just kind of keep that in mind, maybe it'll be slightly less devastating if, obviously the worst happens. But if it does happen, you can just rebuild it again until you win this game that you've created. I love roots that are kind of bulging up from the earth surrounding the tree, so I made sure to add a good number of those as well. All right, so now it's time to start applying the chocolate. And in preparation for this episode, I actually picked up a bunch of different brands of dairy-free chocolates. And there was one clear winner. The captive and I tried everything, and the best one was this Santa Barbara Chocolate Company dark chocolate. It's a true like dark bittersweet flavor that against the peppermint is unbelievably delicious. So if you tackle this, I think this is the best one. I'm now going to melt down my chocolate in a double boiler, and if by chance you don't have one, you can easily just pour your chocolate into a metal bowl and put that over a pot with some simmering water inside. Okay, so now we're going to tackle tempering our chocolate. This is a process that seems really intimidating, but actually isn't at all. Basically, what would happen if I melted this chocolate down into a liquid state and just started painting it on is it would take hours to set back up. And that's obviously adding a lot of weight to our structure without giving it any kind of stability. And so what tempering does is it essentially causes the chocolate to sort of seize up and get hard within just minutes of painting it on, and that is what we want to do. First, I want to preface this by saying I am not an expert chocolatier and I have not worked with a lot of tempering. So I'm just going to show you what I know works, and I'm sure that there are other ways to do this and probably get more precise results. But what I found works is if you heat your chocolate up to about 120 to 130, somewhere right in the middle there, get it nice and liquidy, then take it off the heat, pour a little more dried chocolate into it, and you want to lower that temperature down to somewhere around 80 degrees. If you're having any difficulty getting it cold enough, what I ended up doing was taking a bag of frozen peas and just put them under my pot and kept stirring until I hit that 80-degree mark. Once I had cooled it down enough, then I actually popped it back up on the heat and slowly heated it back up to about 90 degrees, and that is when you know your chocolate is going to be in temper. It was now time to test the tempering by smearing a little bit on parchment and setting a timer for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, you should start to see it hardening and drying, and if you don't, it means your chocolate is not in temper. So now I'm able to start painting all of these peppermint vines with chocolate. You want to make sure you use a very light touch when you do this because obviously the peppermint's very delicate. But thankfully, once it's fully coated in chocolate, it will gain a lot more rigidity and stability. Once your tree is fully coated and you've given it some time to set, then you want to go in and do at least 2 full coats over the entire tree. And then in the thickest areas, you can go anywhere from 3 to 4 layers just to make sure you build it up. And you can even begin to sort of sculpt a little bit with the chocolate to achieve the desired shape that you like. After it had all had plenty of time to set, I then went in with a blade and I just kind of carved off anything that was jutting out a little bit too far. And then I started taking sculpting tools and just gently sort of carving away, creating grooves and just planing away until it started to take on a bark-like surface. All right, it's really starting to look like something. And now I'm going to take this dairy-free, it's by King David white chocolate. I'm going to melt it down, put it in a piping bag, and start highlighting these branches and hopefully create the look of freshly fallen snow. How I'm doing this is I'm just going to melt down some of these white chocolate chips and put them in a parchment bag. I won't be tempering this chocolate because I actually want it to stay in a liquid state for kind of as long as I can get it. It will help me smooth out the surface as I apply it and give me just a little bit more control. I would actually say this is probably the easiest part of this project because all you're doing is taking this chocolate and placing it anywhere that snow would collect on the tops of a tree. And again, this is kind of hard to mess up. You just start working from the top and you make sure that it looks a little bit drippy. Once I was all done with that, it was time to do the really fun part, I think, which is melting down a whole bunch of this white chocolate. And I will be pouring this all over the basin of the tree, making it look like it is filled in with fallen snow. To get everything to settle down, you give it just a very, very gentle shimmy. And then if you end up with any bubbles or sort of things that look out of place, you can take a heat gun on the lowest setting and gently work those out. Okay, while that sets, I'm going to take the same white chocolate, melt it down, and make some modeling chocolate to create a little figure that I want to have sitting right up on one of the highest branches. So this is going to be a pretty small batch of modeling chocolate, but I honestly don't even need nearly this much. I've weighed out 1 pound of white chocolate and I'm going to melt that down first. Once it was in a liquid state, I removed it from the heat and added 1/3 of a cup of light corn syrup. You then gently mix everything until there are no more clear ribbons that you see in the chocolate, and this should only take about a minute, not too much longer. After it seemed like it was ready to go, I poured it out onto some parchment paper and wrapped this up and put this in the freezer so it would get back to room temperature as quickly as possible. And once it reaches that temperature, it's going to be completely solid. While I wait for that to set up, I'm going to take some powdered sugar and a very big fluffy brush, and I'm going to gently dust over these branches where I've put that white icing, and this will hopefully give the snow a soft, powdery effect. Once I was done with the powdered sugar, the chocolate had firmed up enough that I could take it out of the freezer and start working with it. So it was very solid when I pulled it out, and if you need to get it to sort of soften up a little bit, you can manipulate it in your hands, and the heat from your fingers is going to make it a little bit more pliable. And on the flip side of that, if it starts to get too soft, all you have to do is not touch it for a little bit or try to keep your fingers away from it, and it will firm back up fairly quickly. I decided to sculpt a little cute owl that would be perched up on one of the highest branches, and I realized that this was so small I needed to break out a lit magnifying glass, and these are a really helpful tool to use if you want to work on something and get really tiny little details in there. The way I like to sculpt out a face is I sort of mold a general shape, and then I'll take a little tool and divot out some sockets. And then you start rolling up little tiny pieces of either your clay or your chocolate. And then you can make little eyeballs, little eyebrows, and all of these things combined can really start to take on the look of a living face. One other thing I'll add here is that I keep a separate set of sculpting tools for anything food related, as opposed to all of those tools that I use for obviously working with clay and anything else that I fiddle with. And that just keeps everything a little bit sanitary and still edible. Once I was done fully texturizing my little figure, I placed him in the freezer and let him get completely hard before I attempted to affix him to the tree. In order for him to stick on the tree, I took a little bit of that white melting chocolate, applied it to one of the tops of the branches, and then just held him in place until it felt nice and firm. Then I took that same melting chocolate, gave him a few legs and a little few puddles where his feet would be, and then once that had fully set, I just took a carving tool and etched out a few little toes for him. One of the last steps was to take a little bit of vodka and mix it with some edible powder paints, and then I'm going to paint on a few little eyes for him and then even accent his feathers a little bit. If any of the marks you create are a little bit too harsh, you can just dip your brush in clear vodka and then just diffuse as much as you need to. Okay, it is all finished and I love it so much. I'm so tempted to snap off a little piece and try it, but the truth is I don't want to ruin it. And also I was kind of like eating lots of like candy canes and chocolate while I made it. So I think I've had my fill. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I did want to take a moment to say thank you so much for being a patron. It's given me the ability to make all of these fun projects. And in the future, I have so many more that I can't wait to tackle. So until then, thank you once more and have a very Merry Christmas.